G'day campers and welcome to another live Thursday night on the campfire, and welcome Paul Stretton. Sorry, we had him there but he disappeared. So how are we going, Paul?
Yeah, it just disappeared. No idea.
That's the beauty of going live. So welcome Paul, welcome Al,
Nice to be here.
And on tonight's panel we have Paul Stretton-Stevens, who's been here before, who's a future mindset coach and author. We've got Alan Stevens, creator of the Campfire Project, profile and communications specialist. And we've got the gorgeous Helen Glover, founder and host of the Modern Masculine podcast, who, if it's okay with Helen, I'm going to jump straight into, because about 2 weeks ago, nearly 2 weeks ago, you held a Modern Masculine Summit. And I'm really looking forward to hearing how that went and what were the lessons inside that.
Oh, thanks, Scott. Hi, everybody. It was absolutely fantastic. It was such an honor to run such an incredible event. It's funny because I wasn't sure how I could contribute without just adding to the noise that was happening at the time. And I was really aware that as much as we were all throwing around really happy memes about spending time with our families, excuse me, there was a lot of people who don't have that experience. And I really wanted to speak about the masculine side of what's going on at the moment and what it might look like for some families. So I just decided to get together some incredible men that I had met, interviewed, and who I knew of that I hadn't interviewed or met. And I ended up with 16 amazing men from 3 different countries around the world, all talking about addictions, suicide, domestic violence, anger management, stress, drinking, pornography, just an amazing array of people who'd had personal experiences and also expertise. So we had people from like Relationships Australia that spoke about, obviously, an enormous amount of knowledge that they have from working on the ground. Also had a chap who's doing a documentary on suicide. So he had all this information to share, and everybody came with their personal stories. So it was really emotive. It was real. We discussed a lot of really raw topics, and we kind of got down and dirty into what it really looks like when you're dealing with something and you're not sharing or able to kind of come out as a man and say, hey, I'm really struggling here. So it was humbling, and I loved it. Loved every minute of it.
Well, it's quite unique that a woman has held a Modern Masculine Summit. What got you to the point that this was important to you?
Well, I've run the podcast now since about July last year. And I think the thing that I feel is we are in a time where there's a lot of ancestral stuff that we're all bringing through. Men have all got stories. Women have got stories. They're all valid on both sides. And the narrative, especially after Me Too, I felt that I almost didn't know how to act around guys. And I knew guys didn't really know how to act around me. And I know that the divorce rate is going through the roof. Domestic violence is going through the roof. 45 men a week in Australia are committing suicide. So like 3 times what's happening with women. But as on the other side of that, domestic violence rates, there's 2 to 3 women a week being murdered as well. Yeah. So for me, I just thought what we're looking at is an overall issue of how we've kind of created men in our environment to not be allowed to speak in any direction. I just thought it must be awful to not know how to speak to somebody, whether you're going to, get done for sexual harassment, or whether you're going to get told off because I can hold the door up myself, or, kind of stuff that's too far and really difficult for people to operate within. And also it comes from that kind of standard thing of like, what are men thinking and feeling? And I don't get a chance to speak to anybody about that, because unless you're kind of 20 in the back of a party until 4 a.m. having an in-depth conversation with a man, then as you get older, you don't really get the opportunity to really talk to other men that aren't your partner about how they're feeling and what's going on. So through coaching men, I've been allowed to step into some incredible moments of realization, of depth, of beauty. And I really wanted to take that further afield and say, well, what are men really feeling? Let's talk about the difficult subjects, and let's show everybody that men do talk, and let's show everybody that women do listen, and that we are actually all interested in how this plays out, and the equality and the fairness of actually just showing up with your humanness, really.
Yeah, beautiful. So I'm loving this because it's a great conversation, because I'm a big fan of men at the minute, because I think men are stepping up. I think men are taking on the challenges of actually trying to own their emotions when they've never actually been able to do that. So I think it's a brave summit. I think it's a good summit. I think it's one that really needs to be had. What's the lessons that you learned from the summit that were surprising for you?
Well, I'd like to just ask Alan a couple of things about it, actually, because I'm really interested in what Alan thinks, because Alan was one of my panelists on the 3 of the days. So he came on the Friday afternoon, on the Saturday afternoon, and also on the Sunday morning. So we had kind of an introduction to the day. We had a panel, and at the end of the day, we had kind of wrap-up panels. And it was really a very beautiful structure. And so I'd be really interested, Alan, what you really felt came through.
Okay, well, what I really liked about it, first of all, was I've been involved in a lot of men's groups before that were run by women, and that all never seemed to feel right with, because the women were trying to direct the men. You did a beautiful job in facilitating it and allowing the men to be themselves and up front. And that was the main thing that came out. I realised that finally we've got women who are supporting us, but not trying to direct us, which was really great. But what I also got out of it was listening to the other men, and all of them stepping up and being so open about their past, and realising it's not the stigma of the past. There wasn't any shame with any of them. And that's where most men seem to feel that, all this stuff I'm ashamed of. And I go, well, what are you ashamed of? Did you do what you did knowing that it was wrong, or did you do it with the best knowledge you had at the time? If you did it with the best knowledge you had at the time, you shouldn't be ashamed. And these men are proving that, because they didn't know better at those times. The situations they were in virtually they allowed the situation to control them. They've now realised differences, and they're standing up and telling everybody what they got out of it, what they've learnt over that time. So they're the leading examples of helping the men that are coming behind us to make sure that those men have a better opportunity than we've had, because we didn't have anybody guiding us. Like you said, the divorce rates through the roof. It's around about 50% of all the marriages, either the husband is absent physically, so they're no longer there, or they're emotionally absent because they're focused on, bringing money in and, providing for the family, that they've lost their direction of why they're actually out there working in the first place. The family is the most important thing, but we've lost sight of that because, we have our worth on what we're able to bring in. That's our way of hunting and bringing back the beast. When we were hunters, well, now we're bringing back the beast as far as the food goes by working in a job, and we're disconnected. So those boys are growing up with no role models. To have these men step up and tell their stories openly without any shame and saying, look, this is what we've learned, this is what you can learn from us, is absolutely magnificent. And I feel we're extremely privileged to have now connected with a lot of those men that I didn't know from that group before.
It was a privilege. The caliber of man was extraordinary. Yeah.
How did it feel, Helen, having all these men sit here, own their stories, and you be the woman there facilitating that? How did that feel?
Well, I do that. That's my thing, is to hold space for shadow work. So for me, when we talk about gallantry and about being courageous, for me, courage and bravery is actually owning the self. And that is the most courageous you can ever be. And I really, my theory on that, an opinion that I have come to, is we're coming at the end of 100 years. Just had V-Day in England, which was 70 years, I think, since the end of the
75,
war, and it's 100 years really since the end of the First World War, and so we're coming off the back of that, and so we've had a generation that was like my great grandfather would have been in the war, and then he raised his son, who then went to war, who raised like my mum and dad, who then raised us, and so we're coming off the back of the men being at war, and World War One was face-to-face brutal battle. It was horrific, and there was nothing was processed from that. It was all held in the body, and then of course the next generation comes along and goes into war again, and then women held together the country, stepped in. They went through the suffragette in the kind of late 1915 to 20 when the men pretty much went to war, which is why they got the vote, really. And then so we've come up to now where we've not really got any battles as such, but the battle is within now. The battle has become the battle within themselves, the battle to face all of this stuff that's happened, all of the training of, you're not going to talk about it, you've seen terrible things, the trauma, suppression, and all of the difficulty that comes with that, and the training of the father or the grandfather being terrified of anybody actually showing an emotion, because they couldn't possibly experience that themselves because it's just too much. So there was the suppression because there was a fear around actually feeling anything. You can't feel anything when you go into stuff like that. You would lose it. You've got to be strong to hold it together. But that's counterproductive to how we live now. And so we're coming back with now the biggest battle I feel men are facing is the battle to actually let all of this out and go, and is the height of courage and bravery after years and years of training that it's not possible and you're not allowed and it's not good enough and it's all these other things. And so when I sit in circle with men and I see a man actually start to really embrace his own thoughts and emotions and what that really looks and feels like for him, it's humbling to the point that it's emotional. We did a men's circle on the final morning, and at the very end, everybody said what was in their heart. Well, I was just, even now, I'm just like really emotional thinking about it because it was so moving, feeling the heart of these amazing men, and it was an absolute blessing to be part of it, and all power to them because like Alan said there, and Alan was one of them. Alan and these men are leading the way, so you're part of that group, Alan. Just so you know.
That's it.
How do you feel leaving your heart on the table in amongst other men, Alan?
It was around that, as we were asked, what we were fearful of and other things, and I just told them what I felt from my heart, and in that, because with these men, it's like when I'm out bush with the Aboriginal groups and they sit around the campfire and we talk there, it's all about respect, and we know that the other person is not looking at us with judgment. They're looking at us to help us find solutions. There for each other. And by the way, on that, Helen, I'd like to say as well, one of the things that really impressed me was that when we went into the circle, Helen actually took her off screen and put her picture up, or the modern masculine label up. So she wasn't actually sitting in the circle as such. So she gave us that respect of listening from the background, so that the men could just feel it was just the men together. So that actually made it easier for us, or it made it easier for me to express myself around the men. I don't have a problem talking to men anymore. From one of the things I've been through, rites of passage and other things, because those men are there for you. And that's one of the things the Campfire was built on. It was about Campfire Project. It was about having that camaraderie. So it's really important. I think most men really want to talk, because when you talked about battles and wars, we used to have what we called hero intelligence. And the man felt his worth by protecting his home, by protecting his country, by putting his life on the line. He got respect. He got recognised, got sex, all of those things that made him feel that he was worthwhile. But you couldn't show your emotions, because if you did, you'd show a weakness to the enemy. So we learnt to hold it all down. And all of a sudden now we've got no wars. And what we do, well, we do see it in the boardroom, because now we've got this aggressive behaviour from a lot of the men in the boardroom, which is them just acting out that hero intelligence without having the actual war. And so now we look at that behaviour, which is exactly the same as a hero's intelligence in the war situation, but we see it as abusive. We look at it with disdain now when they're acting that way in a boardroom. So it really threw another spanner in the works for the men, going, hang on, isn't that the way we're supposed to be? Yeah. So there's all of those issues going on. So it makes it difficult for any man to step up and to go, okay, I'll confront my emotions now. But and it took, we were told, first of all, that we're in the fix-it mode, we're in the compassionate empathy, let's fix the problem. Women were very well into the emotional side. They could talk about it. We were told we had to be more emotional, so we jumped right into it. And it was like jumping into the deep end of the pool without having ever had a swimming lesson. And so we were floundering and drowning, and then we're even more confused, and he didn't know how to handle it. So to actually sit around men who can speak in that particular way, even though as I was nervous and everything else, I was thinking, right, I'm with these men and I look up to all of them. How do I fit into this? But being in that group and talking to it just made it so easy. Once we started talking, I couldn't, like I am now, you couldn't shut me up. I was happy to share. And it was lucky that Kenny Mamarella de Cruz was hosting the men's circle, because if he hadn't been doing such a good job, they probably wouldn't have been able to shut me up.
Look, because you're full of wisdom, mate. Everyone loves hearing what you've got to say. You've got plenty of experiences. So I'm going to jump over to Paul now, if that's okay. I don't know if that's my microphone or not. But Paul, you're an ex-veteran.
Yeah.
How does this sit with you, being in the fact that you've been in the military? Had you have seen battle?
I've been in conflict zones, yeah.
Yeah. The modern masculine man inside the military, what's he like?
Well, I'm not really in tune with what's happening these days, apart from the fact that we're talking about generations here, and there are generational changes and real generational significances. In my generation, and they've proven now that once you've been on an operation and there's been an incident, for example, you would always get a debrief at the end of the day. Yeah. And that's more of an operational need than a need for the actual people involved in that particular incident, despite what you've seen or what you've experienced or what you've had to do. And that really never helped me or my comrades, because that was literally an operational debrief. It's very matter of fact, place, date, time, this happened. You fill out the forms, boom, done. Move on, finish your shift, go home, sleep, get up the next day, repeat. And that really never addressed any of the needs that any of the people I worked with had at that time. And I'm in a number of Facebook groups with people who served at the same time as me and the subsequent years. And all too often you see and hear of people who are suffering later on in life in some way, shape or form, because nothing was addressed earlier on. And now they don't know where to go. And very often they turn to the military associations they may belong to or the military charities, and they try and help these people.
What's your experience with that now? Being that, you've had your opportunities in life and you've been through the conflict zone, you've understand PTSD, but you've experienced a very different way of life. You're a coach now. You're a future mindset coach. What do you see needs to be done inside the military for that particular, for the mental health strategies for PTSD guys?
But I think these days is really, it's so different. I mean, I've been talking to a couple of guys recently, and they've recently left the services. I spoke to a guy probably about 3 weeks ago, and his son's in the military. And his generation's more of a soft, shall we call it a softer generation? You know, they haven't grown up with any serious hardships.
Yeah.
And that, I think back to what Helen was saying, that really affects the generation of today and how they're likely to perform in a military scenario. And their training has had to be adapted to cater for that. Otherwise, they're never going to get the volunteers they need. They're never going to retain them, never going to keep them. So they've had to adapt their training methods. War's still war, conflict's still conflict. Technology plays a larger part these days, but they still have to have the military mindset for the job and the task at hand. But the way they go about developing that now is very different to, you know, when I was in the services. So I think they've learned and they've had to adapt over the years.
Well, it's really interesting to me because I was training at F45 for a while, and there's a young guy who I'm going to be bringing on Sunday to do a one-on-one, and I am so impressed with him. And for me, he's the young modern masculine. He's fit as, he's studying to be a paramedic. He does a lot of talks in amongst his community and mates about suicide and awareness and how to help each other. And he's sponsored by Lulu Lemon, who just get behind him. And the one thing I've noticed about Nat is, and the community that he's a part of, the younger generation in their 20s, they really love each other and take care of each other in a way that I've never seen in men my age. And it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. And I'm looking forward to doing that on Sunday. And I'm going to ask him some of the questions and some of the stuff we're talking about tonight. I'm going to throw at him and see where he's at.
And that's an interesting aspect you brought up there, Scott, because when I first joined the services, I mean, I came from an inner city, and the only reason I really joined the services was to get away.
Yeah.
That was a way out. You know, it was adventurous, it was exciting and everything else, but the primary aim was to get away from inner city Nottingham. And none of the youngsters, like as you've described, were, you know, caring for one another, you know, being in groups and that. Whereas I see now my daughter's generation, my niece's generation, they all have big groups of friends and they all know each other really well and they're very supportive.
Yeah.
You know, and if you translate that into the military and you've got youngsters of the same age, they're more likely to bond quicker and have that supportive network amongst themselves from day one.
Yeah.
So all the military trainers have to do then is utilize that for the aims of the job that they're actually entering into.
Yeah, just
that will give them a head start.
Oh, it'd be fascinating to get into the tactics of that, and hopefully one day we will. If it's okay with everybody, I'm going to jump over because there's a question that's been thrown up, which I feel is very, very much now, and it's directed at Alan. Do you think men fear judgment or feel unsafe when expressing emotions and feelings in front of women?
Oh, yeah. I think they do. Because one of the biggest issues why I started the Campfire Project was that so many men were telling me when I asked them, well, what's your role in the workplace? What's your role at home? They had no idea. There was confusion. That was probably the main word that came up over and over. Yeah, they were confused. So to then step up and start talking to a woman and express your emotions, you're not quite sure what's going to come, because we've had some of the women who, you go to open the door, someone will say thank you very much, and they're appreciative of it, and others will tell you I can open the door myself. And so we've got such a variation with the women and their attitudes that most men just don't know where to go. What do we actually do here? Do we say something? Do we not say it? If you don't say it, then that will come up. It's like men were starting to think no matter what we do, we're going to be wrong. And so it made it very difficult. This is why a lot of men started pulling back from women. They're not talking to their spouse, for instance, in the way that they could be. And because of that, that's putting a wedge between them. And marriages are breaking down faster than they were breaking down before.
Sorry.
I'd love to say something about that, because I actually interviewed a bunch of random strangers on the streets of London back in September, October last year. And I actually went up to people and just said, excuse me, I I run a podcast. I'd love to interview you about masculinity and about your communication in your relationships. And they said, okay. I interviewed some Freemasons because I was outside the Freemason Hall, a bartender, a florist, a couple of randoms walking around. And the question I asked them was, what do you need to open up to your significant other? What do you need? And how do you feel about that? And all of them said, we just want to be heard. Just want to be heard. And we don't want to be told what we've said. We just want to listen to, we just want an environment where we can say how we feel and not have anybody say anything about that. And I just said to most of them, that's exactly what I want. You know, and that's a human right, isn't it? To be heard and to be seen. And so I think this was the beauty in the response was that it was just about having space. That was another comment. Just give me the space to talk. And also, if I don't know what to say right then, let me walk away and come back, and I'll talk about it then. But what was interesting is I interviewed a young barman, and I said to him, you know, I've just interviewed a bunch of people. I'd love to ask you the same question, but I'm interested as to whether your answer is the same. And his answer was so different. He's talked about vulnerability and how if he was going to be vulnerable, he wanted his girlfriend to be vulnerable too, because she's always so tough. And I just was like, wow, that's really interesting to see that kind of, you know, interchange where there was a guy saying, hey, I'm willing to be vulnerable here, but you can't just sit there knowing everything. Like there's a vulnerability not knowing, you know. So yeah, it's so interesting. I think men do feel that kind of just the need for space.
Yeah, we need to be able to be heard. And you find that as you said, it was a young guy. So we're finding the difference in the generations. Yeah. So the younger men are starting to learn those things. They're hearing more of it. We've got more things happening on social media talking about, you know, expressing ourselves. And so they're growing up with that. But as you go up through the generations, you get to people like me, I'm close to 70. So in that particular situation, it was a different upbringing that we had. We're conditioned by doing things over and over again all through our life. And so some of those behaviours become hard to change. In my case, they were triggered by a lot of events that were happening, and I thought things have got to change. So it was either put up with it the way it was going and always have broken relationships and everything else, or take a different line to it. And it was lucky because of the connections I had with the Aboriginal community that I learnt about love, humility, and respect, which are their three pillars. And from that, I then started hearing men talking and being open to each other. First time I sat down with them, I was very wary. But when they started talking, I went, oh, my God, this is incredible. It's what I've been looking for, but couldn't find anywhere else. And I think that's where a lot of men are. We want to be heard. We want to be able to talk and express ourselves without being criticised or told what to do. And we'd like our partners to be able to do the same thing. But in the past, it's been a case of that fear of actually opening up and what will be the outcome? Will we be seen as men? Because men were supposed to be tough and leading. That's our belief.
Well, it's interesting that because being vulnerable to a woman and opening yourself up, it's a tough thing for a bloke. But I'm leaning the other way a little bit with when guys do that, we're asking women to be vulnerable back. And I'm not sure that they know how to do that to a man. Because as men, they're not used to it. We're learning to be vulnerable to each other. So when we come back to a woman and we're vulnerable, I don't know that it's an experience a lot of women have had.
Yeah,
Colin, you might be able to weigh in on that.
Yeah, put yourself in their position. Like we're expecting them to be vulnerable. We've got to ask ourselves what we're like before. Were we vulnerable ourselves? So we're asking them to do something that we weren't able to do for a long period of time, and we want them to do it now. So it's an understanding that we should be searching for. Have that understanding between us. And one of the things we found that when we started running the panel discussions on the campfire, women have been in the group since day one, but they were always sitting back in the background, showing respect to the men. But once we started the panel discussions, they couldn't help themselves. They were sending me personal messages saying, never heard men talk this way before. We love it. And we want to get involved in the conversation because we want to talk to these men, because we don't talk to men like this. And so we've all got the desire. We want to be, feel that we can express ourselves, both men and women. But the problem has always been, how do we do that? Men, how do we do it with women? How do women do it with men?
I feel the way in which that can only happen is when you own your own story and you trust yourself in that respect. Because one of the things that we're talking about before is talking about opening the door for a woman. I'll always open the door for a woman, not necessarily to be doing the right thing, but just for respect for who she is. I'm not going to change that. Even if somebody has a crack at me for doing that, that's their issue, not mine. I respect them, so I'm going to open the door for them. So for me, any conversation comes down to the fact that you need that self-trust. If you've got that self-trust, and then you can be vulnerable. And I think that's something that in society is the one thing that really holds us back, owning your own story.
I'd like to speak into that as well, though. And this goes back to Paul. I was really, really interested in what you were saying, Paul. I have a strong interest in military and PTSD. I actually coached in PTSD and adjustment disorder returned servicemen and women a few years ago for vocational coaching. What I found was that we're running a double narrative in our environment where we're saying, come here, come here, come here. Yes, tell us everything. Of course you feel like that. We don't want you to commit suicide. We want to hold you. We want to look after you. You're our war heroes, blah, blah, blah. And similarly, we're saying at the moment, we want men to talk. We want them to open up to our feelings, blah, blah, blah. And then they do. And nobody knows what to do about it. And so then I find that offensive, that then all of a sudden somebody will come over the top of them with a meme that says something about looking on the bright side, or, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, I'm sorry, it actually does kill people. And sometimes it doesn't make you stronger. It makes you bitter or like a hermit or depressed or have trauma. All of these things, we're saying one thing and then we behave completely differently. And I have a problem with that personally. And a lot of the guys that I helped just facilitated, they were talking about what it really felt like to have that mateship and then have no mateship because they'd left the army. So I get that kind of connective group, how they were taught, they rely on each other. It's a war situation. They were all just back from Afghanistan. One of the boys was quite severely injured through a bomb blast. And so I actually dealt with a lot of his team, and they were all had their own stories of their own experience there. But all of them were separated from each other when they were discharged. And they were going to people then who just wanted to fix them because they had the money, government money, to fix them. But they weren't actually getting any kind of understanding or any holding for what they really, really felt about what they'd been through, about how they felt coming home, about losing their status, losing their mates, feeling angry, all of the stuff. And so I really, it's interesting, Paul, when you said those things were done as kind of like part of the military process, but it didn't help you. And a lot of what we do doesn't help because we're not really holding the space where we want to hear what people really want to say, because it's too hard. And that's why I feel so strongly about having deep, open communication where we see the depths of a person's angst, anger, sadness, pain, so we can normalize it rather than dismiss it. And I think that there's only that really can then start to make an impact into people who are really struggling, that they'll hear something and they'll go, okay, it's not just me. And I resonate with that and I'm going to be okay, and I'm just like that guy. So there's a lot of healing in that, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you're actually in the military, and you have these events and you have these debriefs, you don't know any better. That's the norm. There is nothing else. You don't expect anything else. You know, you really don't. You know, these days it's a little bit more different. You do, there is some support there, but when we were in, it was like, this is your debrief, this is it, away you go, carry on as normal. And people would do that for years, carry on as normal, and it becomes normal. So when somebody has to leave for a particular event and they can no longer serve, it's a real shock to the system. And it's not that they need help because of the events and the traumas necessarily. The loss is it's a grieving process because they've lost all their mates, they've lost their job, they've lost their livelihood, their way of life, their banter. If you go to a military hospital and you listen to veterans in a military hospital that have had all sorts of horrific injuries, their banter is to a civilian is just so surprised by what is being said amongst the men themselves, or the men and women themselves, because they have such camaraderie and such banter, but having served together and experienced similar things, that's their release. And then when they go into civilian life, they no longer have that banter and that release. And that is probably harder than a lot of the other things they have to deal with. I'll give you an example. I belong to something called Blind Veterans here in the UK. And they tried a couple of weeks ago to put on a Zoom call as a social thing on a Friday afternoon for a lot of working age veterans. And it was chaos. I mean, they weren't as organized as you guys on the Zoom calls and all this sort of thing. And people were talking over each other and their language was appalling. And so were the implications and the nuances. But everybody seemed to enjoy themselves, you know. But the next time, obviously, they wanted a bit more etiquette and a bit more organization to the chaos. But it just showed you some of these guys have been out of the services for years. But as soon as they're put in together with servicemen or women, that's what came out to the fore again, you know. But I did wonder earlier on, Helen, when you said about you're in London doing some interviews, did you find there was any cultural differences? Even though we speak the same language to Australians, I mean, was there any cultural differences you noticed?
Well, that's why I wanted to interview in the UK, funnily enough, Paul, because I was thinking, you know, what's the story, you know, and that's why I've done a lot of interviewing in America as well to see what it is. And I think there's a Western pressure to provide. It's actually financial status makes you important. And therefore, you know, the car, the house, the financial kind of get up. And then, you know, the kind of the coping strategy. I find Australia, there's a lot more of the she'll be right, mate. There's a lot of she'll be right, mate. That real kind of it's almost like that old school tradie, tough as anything but soft underneath, but never would say it, and you'd be shocked if you really found out what they were really feeling. Whereas in the UK, obviously I was in London, you could see that there was more of a to be seen to be doing well, to be seen to be doing really well, and to, you know, it was like a bit embarrassing to be asked about your feelings. You know, it was a bit more kind of reserved. Whereas in America, same things, status. And I mean, I interviewed a guy from New York, and he was like, you know, you go to somebody's house and you walk out of there, you're going to kill yourself, you know, because he was saying their house is so amazing and their wife's looking at them as if to say, why isn't our house as nice as that? And he said, you just instantly feel like a loser, you know. And so that financial pressure in the States is even more so, I think. So they're slightly different as far as there's kind of different tough levels, but yeah. I think that it's kind of the standard issue for what's expected of them feels the same. Yeah.
I just want to jump in quickly there about the tradies. It's something that I've noticed which has really changed inside the camaraderie of the tradies, because back in when I first started in the pool industry, we used to sit around and have lunch together, and we sit around and talk and share stories and do the bits and pieces and have a bit of a yarn and sort of get to know each other a bit. These days, you go into any lunchroom, everybody's sitting there on their phone. They've lost that art of communication and sharing the stories. They're missing that intergenerational conversation where, they used to sit there and do the trivia, paper trivia, and the old boys in the corner would be sitting there and, giving their spiel, giving the young guys advice. I personally feel that we need more men's groups for this, because men's groups and intergenerational men's groups, the importance of grandparents and grandkids, but it's one of the things that I'm become really passionate about is dads and kids groups. Go away camping, do bits and pieces, because these days, with technology in your hands and a computer in your hands, I feel we're losing that connection there. And I think that's where the strength in being able to listen to each other comes in. From the grandfather sitting down with the kids. And I had a chat with Peter Lusk, which will be coming up, and he talks about the times he had with his grandfather, and his grandfather was murdered when he was 10 years old. But still today, that relationship was everything to him, because, they were. I don't want to take away too much from the conversation, but he was out in the country shearing the sheep, and all the boys in the shearing shed gave him the job of jumping on the wall. So I mean, it was a bit of a fun job, but just it gave the boys a laugh, and it gave everybody that. And I feel we need more of that in society, because
it gives them a feeling of connection, of belonging, and being around men. So one of the things that I really love was when you interviewed your dad. And I was thinking after that, wouldn't it be great if more men, come on, have the one-on-ones, and then those men to interview their fathers, and then for their sons to interview them as well. So to take it through the 3 generations, because, one of the things, if you get an elderly person down with a young child and they start talking and the connection, you see the older person start to come alive, but the stories and the information they can pass on to the young child is incredible. We've lost that connection, not only between ourselves because of all the devices. As they say, IT, or technology, is the fastest growing industry on the planet. The second fastest is coaching. Why? Because everybody's disconnected from each other and from themselves, even though they've got all this connection with the machines. And so to have that connection again, and to have men talking to their fathers. My father died when I was 3, so I would have loved to have had that conversation. That's one thing that I do regret, never having had that opportunity. But I really want to have my sons having those conversations with me, but also my grandsons, and sharing that knowledge both ways, but understanding where they're coming from at the same time, them understanding what we've been through and what we've got to teach them as well. I talk to young people, as I say, who are my teachers? Everyone, from the youngest to the oldest. Everyone's got something to share. Everyone's got a story, and everyone's story is valuable. So to have that between generations, I think that'd be absolutely magic.
Yeah, it's quite funny you talk about that conversation, because lately that's been a bit of a topic in my life, and it's still an ongoing conversation. I haven't had part 2 of that conversation as yet. I will be having that in the near future. My son's actually asked to meet my father, which is quite interesting. I actually rang him and said, listen, Oscar's actually asked to meet you. And you should be proud of that, because obviously the conversation we had, I now see you through a different set of eyes. And that's a pretty heavy conversation. But what I think is missed is the stories of people, because as guys in particular, and I saw it with David Goggins when he sat there with Professor Jen Mann, and they were doing an interview where David Goggins had a terrible upbringing. His old man was a pretty heavy man, and he talks about when he went back to see his old man before he passed away, and as he was going back, when he was going to see his old man, he went back to being that 8-year-old boy again. I understood that. He sat there with his father, and what he did wasn't okay. But he got to know the story about his father and how he grew up, and became an acceptance. There's no forgiveness for what it is. It's just an acceptance of, okay, well, that's happened. And I think as men, we just need to understand that so we can put it away, because it was really, really interesting watching Jen Mann turn around Dave Goggins and go, well, why haven't you seen a psychologist and dealt with it? David goes, well, I accept it. I understood what happened. I understood how he grew. I can't change it, but I understand the story that made him who he is. And I think as guys, it's like, I think that's why so many guys like playing with engines, because we don't know how they work until we get them down. We pull them down, we open them up. Okay, we put it back to. That's how it works. Put it away in the back of the shelf. We're fine now. We can move on. And it's a really pivotal moment in my excuse me, understanding of how men deal with things, because it was really hard for a woman, a psychologist, to accept the fact that was how it was dealt with. So I wouldn't mind throwing over to Paul for any experience or words on that.
I think it's really clear that men do compartmentalize more so than women, in my experience. And whether they've inherited the skill unconsciously or not, I'm not sure, but possibly the case, because it seems a fairly natural thing for them to do. Now, the trick is, obviously, when you're working with people, is you need to open those compartments and those different parts of the self. You know, very often I'll be working with somebody and I'll say, okay, and what about that part of you? And very often you'll see there's a pause there, because they're realizing that there are different parts of them that make up the whole. And they haven't really broken it down into the constituent parts. And when you start saying, okay, let's work with this part, and that's a really alien concept for a lot of men. They're really, oh, we can do that. And it's like they need permission to actually work with that, or even understand the concept to start with. And there's a really good diagram I like to get them to do, is put a nice oval of the head and say, okay, break that down into all the parts of you. Divide that up. You know, wherever lines, whatever colors, whatever labels you want to give it, label it. Do whatever you want to do with it, but put you into this. And what are you? Who are you? What's your identity? And fit that within there. And I tell you what, it takes them a long time. You won't do that in a session. They've got to go away. It's homework. You know, very often you'll get a call in between going, and what about this? You think I should put this part in or this part in? Does this count? Does this count? Whatever it is for you, everybody's different. But the exercise is so valuable for everybody. You know, even if you're just listening to this now, just go away and do it, and just realize there are different parts of you, and you react according to those different parts. And if there's a part that doesn't serve you, then shouldn't you be working on that? You know, but men don't always realize that. I think women do, in my experience, because when you say about working with the partner, oh, okay, and just get on with it. But men aren't. It doesn't naturally come to them.
Isn't the hardest question you could ever answer is, who am I? Oh. I sat in an audience with 400 people, and that was the opening question from one of the speakers. I'd like you to spend 2 minutes to come up with the answer to this question. Who am I? Only 2 people in that audience came up with it. And I sat with that question for months. Even now, I'm still growing. I'm not who I'm going to be. I'm who I am now. And an acceptance of who I am now has allowed me to do the things that I do now. You know, and it's, yeah. So, Alan, do you want to throw some wisdom onto that one, please?
Yeah, well, I'll just go back a little bit. One of the words that keeps coming up all the way through, we've been talking about men want to be understood by the women. Women want to understand men. We've talked about other areas, and understanding is the one thing that keeps coming up. And then we talk about acceptance. Well, until we have understanding, we can't have acceptance. And so finding that level where we can really understand things, taking that time out, so important.
Well, I find that's to be with the campfire. And like, I love this place with all my heart. And it seems to be we're coming up to the 50th minute. And now we're starting to get in the goal. And it's the same thing every time, because it takes time to listen and understand each other so that we can come up with a cumulative answer, so that we can all go, you know what, I like that. Actually, this is my opinion based upon my experience. So, Alan, do you want to throw a bit on to the top of that?
Yeah, well, see, taking the time to actually connect and everything else, at the moment, I think the average, they say, for a coach to start giving advice to their client is 70 seconds.
Oh, wow.
How much information can you get in 70 seconds? You need to be able to listen to people and take that time. Every conversation we have, all the one-on-ones I've done, all the panel discussions, there's been 65 panel discussions and well over 100, 110 one-on-ones. They all take a little while to get together, because even though we know each other, each time we get together, we've got to connect again. And so that takes a little bit of time. And the thing is not to be rushing that, to accept that things take time. Our whole society has been, let's get it all done now. Instant gratification. The only time we want anything not to be instant is when we're having sex. Outside of that, everything we want it yesterday. And it's the same
with that, Alan. It depends on the scenario. Sometimes and it needs to be over quickly because we've got other things to do. Just
yeah, well, the football's on. Okay. But that's the thing. The stuff that really is of value, we don't take enough time to get there. It's like if somebody's talking about their pain, we don't want to feel it because we know what they're feeling. For us to, we take their pain on, it's like we're feeling the pain. And so we don't really want it. And this is why we try and fix things quickly. And that was one of the reasons why men were so quick to come in and try and fix things, simply because they don't feel comfortable with the emotion. But to take the time and sit, and that's what we've been doing in these talks and everything, we take time. So we're not just jumping in, all of a sudden, bang, we're feeling all this emotion. We're slowly bringing it on, but at the same time, we're dealing with it as well. So these conversations are always lengthy conversations. But as you said, the gold always starts to come out towards the end of it. And sometimes that's one of the reasons why I'd love for the things to go well over an hour, but I know that people won't watch it beyond that point.
Yeah, it's funny. We often do go over an hour, and I think that's the problem in society. I think that is the single biggest problem. We don't take the time to hear, and it's one of the things that I love most about my life at the minute. I've slowed down certain areas, and I want to take the time to hear people, because that's where you get the knowledge. That's where your growth is.
Yeah. One of the things I'm looking for all the time, it came up in a conversation I had today, was about the fact that people who are feeling their life is rubbish and everything else, and they say, I've got to change it, but they don't do anything. Or if you put something in front, that won't work. The real thing is that we should be looking at, if they don't have self-love, you won't make any changes. So with everything that we're doing, the whole thing comes back to, it's all about self. When I'm working with other people, I focus on them. But to be the best that I can to be for them, I've got to first focus on me. I've got to find that self-love. I've got to find, I can take on anyone's pain, listen to their stories and everything else without taking it internally or trying to fix things, if I'm in that state of grace where I've got that self-love. And so if I can then work with them, they can get there as well.
Do you mind if I challenge you on that? Because self-love, right? It's something talked about a lot these days. We've got to find that self-love. We've got to, in my eyes, I think it's self-trust.
So this is a thing that we get caught up on the wording that we're using. So what is self-love to me might be self-trust to you.
Yeah.
It's coming back to, though. So if I ask a couple, what is most important to you? And if a couple says to me, both of them say it's loyalty. One's idea of loyalty is that, like the woman's, you don't look at another man at all. Another woman at all. You don't talk to another woman. His view is that, well, he doesn't flirt around with other women around her. He shows her that respect, but he might just chat with somebody somewhere else. He may not take it any further, but he'll flirt. So that we interpret words differently. So if we ask another person, well, what's important to you? And they say such and such, before I jump in that 70 seconds and try and diagnose and tell them, that's wrong or whatever, I go, well, tell me, you've just said such and such. What does that mean to you? And then when they get a bit more, one of my sons asked me, they said, well, look, if you're asking questions, how many questions do you ask? I say, ask as many as you can. They said, well, when you've exhausted your questions, what do you do? I guarantee there's more questions. Ask them. Because the more that you can fully understand it, the more you understand them, you've also shown them the respect that they deserve. And at the same time, they recognize that, and they then have more trust for you as well. Because it's not about you, it's about them when you're talking to them. And when you can do that, you've got to be right with yourself first of all. And that's what I consider to be self-love. It's not, oh, I'm wonderful, I know all the rest of it. Go and look in the mirror and say, oh, you're beautiful and all that. But it's being right in your own skin, being able to take on other people's things without taking it in, helping them. And, I can sit now with people. I've got the personality traits that I'm very empathetic. I pick a lot of stuff up. And when I was a massage therapist, one of the things I found it really difficult afterwards, I was exhausted. Now I can listen to some of the most horrific stories that people have had. I can be present for them. And then when they walk out the door, I just go back to what I was doing. It hasn't been that I don't care, but I haven't taken it on.
Yeah.
And at that point, if I don't take it on, then I can be my best version of me for them.
That's interesting, because that's still a skill I'm learning, and I believe that's a skill.
But just to pick up on what Alan's just said there as well, is about the second growth industry being coaches. I think if you're going to take out time to dedicate and serve your clients, I limit myself to how many clients I have at any one time, and I won't go over that. Yeah. Now, I know some people who go, another one, another one, another one, another one, and they just keep going. Now, how can they best possibly serve all of those individual clients? So if people are seeking coaches, then that's one of the questions to ask is, well, how many do you have at any one time? Is there a limit? How many's on the program, et cetera, et cetera. And by me being respectful to myself, loving myself, et cetera, I'm limiting myself. So I can do that. I can provide that. I'm looking after myself, because if I stretch myself too widely, everything's diluted and I can't possibly serve them, and I wouldn't feel good. So it's back down to self-love, isn't it? And self-trust and self-worth and everything else that's in the self. Yeah. But I think when we were talking about talking earlier on, and one of the things my wife and I have done recently, we used to have breakfast and then meditate after breakfast for at least 30 minutes. But what we've done in recent months, especially probably because we're on lockdown, we've taken a different tack. And I've found this really beneficial, because everything we spoke about men's dialogue, women's dialogue, this brings that out. So we've got lots of personal development books, as you do, and we read one particular part of it's an audio book, listen to an extract, and then we discuss what we've understood from that, from different standpoints, different viewpoints, masculine, feminine. And it's amazingly understanding, because then that spills over into your life, and you use your life together and those experiences to convey what you want to say about your understanding from the extract within the book. And that is such a valuable exercise. I mean, we look forward to it now every morning. Now, I know not everybody feels comfortable doing that, but for those who do find it difficult to talk to their loved ones, it's a starting point, and it's a focus away from them that they can then use to enter into dialogue.
Yeah.
So it's worth a try.
You're smiling, Helen. Why is that?
I love it. I love that. I think that's great. It's just connection. What I was going to say about that whole thing we just spoke about, with the self-love aspect of it, I get the self-love aspect of it, but I actually think it goes down to self-worth. So when you're actually listening to another person, if you feel worthy, you don't need to give them your opinion. You don't need to fix them. You don't need to feel like you've saved anybody. If you feel like you're worth something, you can stay without actually needing to be anything. And that comes from a really strong, healthy self-esteem. And most of the miscommunication that we have in our environment today comes from a deep level of insecurity that we need to either be seen to be doing it better or to be able to impart some knowledge on the other person that we've learned to show them how great we were at coping. And on some level, that person ends up walking away feeling like, oh, I actually did it wrong. I don't feel heard. I feel reprimanded. I felt talked over the top of. I'm actually a bit pissed off now. Wish I'd never said anything. Feel exposed, a little bit embarrassed. All of these things, because holding space means that you are confident and you have that self-trust, but you don't need any of esteem from that other person. You don't need to build up any part of yourself from their situation. You can just be there, being nothing, because you're enough, just turning up, being nothing. So when we're dealing with a deep, deep level of insecurity across the globe, so much insecurity and difficulty, and this is the kind of the battling in the corporate world, the kind of bypassing in the spiritual world, is everywhere you look, there's this kind of one-upmanship that comes from a deep level of insecurity. And so that really, it affects then how we can possibly perform as a person to hold the space for another. Because if we're constantly trying to be better, then it's impossible to actually have no opinion or to just accept and love and be and encourage. And I find that is an epidemic of our times, is that everybody has got this like onslaught of knowledge that comes from needing to be seen or to have value. And in some way then be filled up from that interaction that was never about them to begin with. Like Alan said, it was always about the other person. So I feel that gets played out a lot. And so we are saying to everybody, talk, but then when they do, there's no space to actually be heard. It's actually some random coaching session that you didn't ask for. And it can be very disconcerting, and in the wrong way, it can shut people down then for a long time. And that courage and bravery is misplaced. So it's a tough one.
That's it. So I see men who are trying to be the man, who are competitive and everything else. It is because of a lack of self-worth. They have to be better than everybody else, which means they never feel good. But if a man just wants to be a man, then he can stand with other men who are being the same, and there is no competition. There's immediately a feeling of belonging. This is where men who are like that can sit down and have these conversations. But I'd say this to any of the men who are listening: if your partner, if there's something going on there, ask your wife or your partner when they come up to you, do you want me to fix it, or do you just want me to listen? Because I can do both. Because a man can fix things, but at the same time, here's something new. And I'm sure, tell me, Helen, do you think that women would love to hear the man say, look, if you just need to talk, I can just listen. Not take it on, not do anything, just listen. And if a man can do that, then there's a damn good chance that he's closer to being in that position where he's comfortable in his own skin, whether you call it self-love, self-worth, or just feels right in himself.
And I think women need to do that too, because we're putting constant kind of single parenting, or we're in corporate or whatever, and we're being constantly putting ourselves into positions where we're making decisions and doing all of these things, and we're kind of wearing the pants, so to speak. But there's also a point where
Go with you.
There's going to be gold in that, I'm sure.
I know. That's why I'm hanging in there. I just want to talk about that moment about do you want me to fix this or do you want me to listen? I call that the fisherman's friend moment that Kenny Malmorella gave to me. Now, remember the old fisherman's friend where he gets the big salmon and goes whack in the face? Because that's what I felt when I heard that. I'm like, that is so simple. And it was one of the biggest moments of my life where I just sat there and went, wow, is it really that simple? Once implemented, yes, it is.
Yeah, we complicate too many things and we don't need to. But then we complicate it because we're so insecure about ourselves. And as I said, it's not about our partner. It's about us, not about the other person. That's because we're so lost and we're worried about doing the right thing. If we are feeling right in ourselves, self-love, self-worth, whatever words you want to put on it, then the end result is that, we're able to then give to the other person and be of service in a much greater way. And then we feel so much better about ourselves again, as opposed to feeling, I'm not good enough, and then worrying about that and feeling even less about yourself.
Yeah, no, very much so. Look, I'm concerned on time because we said we're going to try and stick to an hour, and guess where we're at? An hour and 5. So we do this quite well. And the one thing I'd like to do, because it's a really tough question. What's the one bit of advice you have for our viewers right now? And it changes from time to time because of different situations. And I'm actually going to start with you, Alan, if that's all right.
Yeah, I would say take some time out for yourself. If you're somebody who is always there trying to be of service to other people, but you're not looking after yourself, when you do give to other people, you're giving them an inferior product. You cannot give your best, so therefore you've got to be selfish to be selfless. Take some time out for yourself so you can be the best version of yourself, and therefore be able to give to more people. And when you give to more people in that state, you enjoy giving and they enjoy receiving from you. And then you can receive back from them as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you. Paul?
Well, listening is the key. So I would say listen to yourself, listen to your heart, listen to others, and then listen again. Because you don't always get it first time. I mean, I've lost a significant amount of sight, and prior to that, I used to class myself as a deep listener. And what I say to people now is I'm a super deep listener because I listen to everything. It's my world is listening, and it's such an underrated skill these days. People need to do it more, and the only way to actually become skillful at listening is to listen and to practice. But listen to yourself, listen to your heart, listen to your loved ones, and listen to others, and then listen again.
Can I just thank you for being one of the all-time great listeners? One of the things I've really enjoyed every time you're on a panel is your ability to sit and actually, I take notes to make sure that I don't miss things. You never miss anything. And if ever you want
take notes.
no, but that's a beautiful thing. That means you're really hearing people. So if anyone wants to learn how to do that, I'm going to suggest you follow Paul with that, because it's something I've been admiring since we've known each other. So,
Scott.
No worries. Helen, one bit of advice, bit of gold. I'm sure we just missed some, but.
Sorry, we've had a storm here, so my internet keeps breaking off. Compassion. I always go back to compassion for advice. Whatever you're going through, whatever you're feeling, listen and say, Paul, I couldn't agree with you more. Listen to yourself, listen to the voice within, and then just keep throwing compassion at it. Just keep throwing compassion on top of whatever it is that you think you're doing badly. Throw compassion at whatever it is that you could have done better. Throw compassion at yourself for anything that you feel is difficult. Because right now, it's so up and down. Some days we're killing it, and the next day we're really not. And if we can just keep putting compassion onto our soul, really, listen to how we're feeling, and then say, it's okay, you're doing your best, and have compassion for yourself, and then that helps you to spread it to everyone around you, and it makes for a healthier mind.
Beautiful, thank you. And from me tonight, do something for yourself. If you're under pressure and things aren't quite going right, find something to do for yourself. Last week, I was under the pressure. I felt it. And I did something for myself. And I tell you, this week, my energy levels and the way I'm feeling, the way I can hold space again is back to where it should be. So I want to thank everyone for tonight's panel. And look, it's amazing. We're going for an hour and 10 minutes, and we're just starting to scratch the surface. And thank you very much for being a part of tonight's live. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Alan. Look forward to next week. If anyone's out and about and they're watching the panel and you've done a one-on-one, I'd love for you to come and join us on the lives. Alternatively, if you haven't done a one-on-one, come and do one. Come and do one with myself. Come and do one with Ellen. Come and do one with Angela. Because everybody has a story. And the one thing inside this, and you've heard it tonight, is we listen. When you listen is where you find the gold. Believe it or not, every single person's got gold in them. I've never met anybody that doesn't have it. So from me to you, thanks for sharing the warmth of the campfire. Have a good night, guys. Thank you very much.